were accused of committing war crimes. So in the last decade, in part because of the protests of these women, we've seen since 2003 Argentina lift amnesty on those leaders of the army and the authoritarian regime that were responsible for these crimes. So since 2003, if you were a military leader during the authoritarian regime, you're no longer immune from prosecution, and you could be brought to trial. 700 trials have been initiated, and 50 convictions so far, and reparations totaling a total of, I think I have the number, I thought I had a number, reparations of $3 billion US have been given out to families whose relatives were disappeared. So here we see a state, Argentina, that for a time had an authoritarian regime, practiced torture in the 20th century as part of a regime that didn't respect human rights, didn't respect any kind of political diversity. But it's a state that's now coming to terms with what they did and trying to repair the damage that was done. They've created a number of sort of historical monuments. One of them is a major museum in the center of Buenos Aires, which is one of the major prison camps. But also they have this set of art installations outside the city, ways people are trying to cope emotionally with what happened. These are often, this happened in the 70s and 80s, as people are still alive for whom some people were detained, weren't actually killed, and are still living in Argentina. So this is very alive for them. This is an image. You can see it's different posts, and it's called 30,000 to represent the 30,000 people who were disappeared. And the thing about this image is that only if you're perfectly aligned can you actually see the person's face. And if you go, you can imagine if you went slightly to the left or slightly to the right, you would lose the image. You would no longer be able to constitute the image of this person's face. So it sort of represents symbolically the loss of these people, but they're trying to come to terms with it, not just in terms of revenge, but in terms of emotional processing. So because torture is illegal, because the UN forbids its practice, it gives states like Argentina the sort of the motivation, the principles upon which they can do this kind of healing. We also know that it persists in times of war in democracy. And as I evoked earlier in the lecture, since 9/11, the U.S. has practiced torture against perceived terrorists across the world. So they've done so in Guantanamo Bay, where there's an American military base in Cuba. So basically the Americans have claimed since 1902, they've claimed a little corner of Cuba for themselves. They have a base there, and in Guantanamo Bay there has been torture from, even today, even as late as 2014 anyway, there was people who were going, some of the prisoners were going on hunger strike, and there were force feedings of those prisoners, and that's considered to be a form of torture, to force feed people who are trying to go on hunger strike. So the torture continues even now. But obviously the peak of it was before 2006, during the height of concerns about terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan following the attacks of 9/11. Does everyone knows what 9/11 was? Yeah. Okay, so attacks on the U.S. By Al-Qaeda operatives that were trying to knock down the Twin Towers. Just everyone's got that context, right? Okay. So that happened. That happens in Guantanamo Bay, and it continues to happen. There are still, I think, about 130 detainees in Guantanamo Bay. Obama came to power when he was first elected in his first term, vowing to close Guantanamo Bay. But there are vested interests in the government in the U.S., specifically CIA in particular. They're blocking that and making it very difficult for him to do that. Barack Obama is someone who's willing to admit that what the U.S. was doing was torture. On August 1st of 2014, he said, "We did some things that were wrong. We tortured some folks. We did some things that were contrary to our values." So Barack Obama is willing to use that word, torture, but the CIA is not. They talk about enhanced interrogation techniques. They're unwilling to accept that the techniques they were using, including the waterboarding, were torture. But by any definition, specifically the 1984 UN definition of torture, what they were doing was torture. So this is happening. Guantanamo Bay is also happening at Abu Ghraib, and there was a whistleblower. Some of these cases came to light, and a handful of military officers were disciplined, but very much as in the Bush administration, very much with the idea that these officers were renegades and that they were going against American policies. There's a huge debate going going on in the US now about this issue. A major Senate report that came out late last year that condemns the government's practices. So this is something that the US, I would say, is in a very early stage of coming to terms with, and in a very early stage of healing. But because torture is illegal, the political left, or those who oppose what was happening, have grounds on which to criticize US practice. The UN has strongly criticized US practice as well. Yeah. So in this photo, sorry, the photo on the left, this has to do with sort of ritual humiliation. So there, in Abu Ghraib, there was a lot of the practices had to do with forcing people to do things when they were naked, or forcing them to hold very uncomfortable positions for long periods of time. And in this case, they're outside, obviously. I'm not sure exactly what's happening in the photo on the right. One of the accusations of so people who've been in Guantanamo Bay have started to reveal what happened in it. One of the techniques that's often used is sort of emotional abuse, less physical abuse, more emotional abuse, lots of loud noises, sleep deprivation, and sort of emotional abuse of the detainees. Some of the Abu Ghraib images are much more disturbing. They were trying to humiliate Muslims, so these are U.S. officers who were trying to break the spirit of their Muslim terrorist enemy friends by forcing them to engage in humiliating acts naked, so as to sort of break their spirit. So the thing with torture is it ostensibly is about getting information, and the U.S. did want information from these people, but it often has a side that's punitive as well, or is about sort of psychologically breaking the victim. And that's not just true of torture in the 20th century. I would say that there was an element of that in the early modern period as well. But it's always justified in terms of getting information. So the U.S. justification for intense interrogation techniques was that the U.S. was under military threat, which it was, that important information could be gleaned from these suspects, and that effective and accurate information could be obtained under torture. And so, interesting, it's really the same debate that they were having in the 13th century and the same debate they were having in the 18th century. Does torture produce truth? And does the violation of someone's human rights, who may be a criminal, who may be a terrorist, cannot be justified if it's better for the whole? That is to say, can you justify torturing 100 potential terrorists to save millions of American lives? So those who justify the practice of enhanced interrogation techniques in the U.S. today would make those kinds of arguments, which aren't that different from the arguments that were being made hundreds of years ago. So we can see that this is a practice that's very much alive today, but that the fact that it's illegal does have an impact. So reflecting on the history of torture reveals the long-standing nature of concerns about truth and abuse. This isn't an idea that we suddenly were like, oh, maybe confessions of torture aren't valid. We've been wrestling with this for centuries, but sometimes the stakes are so high that states are willing to take that risk and say maybe all of what we're getting is not true, but some of it might be true, some of it could be very useful, could be very pertinent. The Enlightenment is an important turning point when the West recognized the inherently abusive nature of torture, and that principle has been upheld in the 20th century by the UN, to which all major powers, including the US, are signatories, so they should be obliged to uphold those values. Outlawing torture can mitigate its practice. That means it can lessen its practice. It means that there isn't as much of it going on, and justifies continuing dialogue and activity, diplomatic pressure, activist pressure, political pressure on regimes that practice it. So if we didn't have torture outlawed, there would be no basis on which the UN could put pressure on the US to fess up to what it's been doing and to stop. And I think what's telling, even though the US, I would say, is very, very early on in its process of kind of healing and recognizing what happened, certainly there's much more scrutiny on what's happening, and people know that. And the practice of these enhanced interrogation techniques definitely took a huge downturn after 2006, once it became public. Right? So having it public, having open debate does have an impact, even though it cannot completely eliminate the practice. So for the moment, I think it's the best thing we can do. Good. Questions?